Report. Let's stick with the budget. It was also the first for Amy Adams as finance spokesperson for National, and she's with us in the Wellington studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
So Simon Bridges called this budget the tax and spend and the borrow and hope. So which is it?
Well, I think it's all of those things. We know they're taxing more. New Zealanders are paying $2.4 billion more in taxes now than they were before this government, and that's, we would say, contrary to the promise they made. They're certainly borrowing more. They are borrowing $10.8 billion in the core part of Crown and another $6 billion tucked away at another part of the balance sheet that they're not talking about. Plus, they're definitely spending more. They've got big surpluses, big spending commitments, a very strong economy that allows them to do it. But what we would argue is with all that spending, with all that cash washing around, they're breaking trust with New Zealand, because during the campaign they were very clear with Middle New Zealand, we can't afford to give you that $1,000 of tax back that National had promised you because we need it for this funding crisis. And yet come the budget, what gets funded? Well, embassy in Sweden, foreign affairs, Shane Jones's $1 billion a year slush fund. And yet there's a $200 million cut in Pharmac. There's not enough money to pay for children's health camps. There's not enough money to pay for cheaper GP fees that they promised. And then really interesting, they're actually spending less proportionally or less new money proportionally than National spent. So you just take health. Our last budget put $3.9 billion into health over 4 years. Labour's budget puts $3.2 billion in over 4 years. So not only are they not doing a transformative spend and addressing some sort of funding shortfall that they insisted was there, they're actually putting in less new money in some core areas.
Core government spending, though, up 6.1% against 3.1% as the average over the past 5 national budgets. So that would indicate that an awful lot more money is going into public services.
Well, if you look at the area that both of our last budget and this budget talk about is core public services. So that's health, education, law and order, and looking after families. Our last budget put in $7 billion in operating new money into that. This budget puts in $6.5 billion. Now these are their numbers. I'm not, it's from their budget documents. That's $500 million less in new money than we were putting in. Certainly there's a lot of spending, Susie, but I think what you've got to go back to is not just how much money can they spend. Are they doing the things they promised? Have they shown that there is some sort of funding crisis that they've addressed? And I think the answer to both of those is no.
So are you saying that Labour is not spending enough?
I'm saying that they're not meeting their promises. So they campaigned, they got elected, they earned the right to be government by going out and saying to New Zealand, this is what we will do if we are elected. Now they have to be held accountable to what they said.
But on their promises, you're saying Labour are not spending enough?
I'm saying they've broken a lot of their promises. They haven't delivered. In education, there's a lot of broken promises. In health, there are broken promises. In tax, there's broken promises. The state housing commitment is a broken promise, although Phil Twyford's selling it as a promise. They started off promising 1,000 a year. He increased that to match the national commitment of 2,000. Now he's only delivering 1,600. That is less than he promised. That is not what they said to New Zealand.
A lot of people saying, a lot of commentators saying that this budget could almost have been a national budget. National lite, I've seen somewhere. Is that fair?
Well, look, I think the difference between us is that we didn't just measure ourselves on how much money we could spend. We measured ourselves on, are New Zealanders getting better outcomes? So we had our better public service targets that we published very publicly all the time. We measured, are New Zealanders getting more education or better education? Are they safer? Are they getting more operations? Are they getting more medicines? This government has removed all of those targets and just said, judge us on how much money we can spend. Spending is the easy part of governing. First of all, you've got to have a strong economy, and business confidence tells us they are wrecking this economy, and over the long term we'll see that drop. And then you've got to make the most of the money you have. This is money that's come out of the pockets of hardworking Kiwis. There's an obligation to spend it well.
Has Labour, though, been given very little room to move because of the unbridled immigration and the number of people coming in?
No, absolutely not. Look, we had a plan to address that, and actually with immigration, the trick, of course, is to make sure the people coming in are people who are going to add to New Zealand and provide net benefit to New Zealand. That's always been the test. Actually, if you don't have access to skilled workers, our economy won't grow and they won't be able to afford their spending. The number one constraint on growth that businesses talk about is access to skilled labour. And if Labour, the Labour government, put a hold on that, as they've said they will, that is going to squeeze the business sector even further and make GDP and tax revenue go down further.
Should Labour have thrown their fiscal responsibility rules out of the window and borrowed money?
Well, that's a decision they should have made pre-election. in the election campaign, they were
Would
very
that have
clear.
been wise?
Well, if Grant Robertson wants to break his promises, then he can do so. He has promised New Zealand that he will spend a certain amount and live within certain rules. And I think New Zealand should hold him to that. We certainly will. One interesting thing, though, is their numbers from pre-election. They clearly had no concept of what it cost to be government. Take police alone. They said their police numbers would cost $40 million a year over the next 4 years. This budget doesn't deliver anything like their total number, and they're spending now $388 million, just showing they had no idea of the cost of their promises.
You've told us all the bad things, or some of them. What's the good thing?
Oh, look,
is there a good thing in this budget?
Yeah, there absolutely is. Look, if we were still in government, if
What's
this
the
is a
good thing?
budget that I'd presented, we would absolutely have wanted to see midwives get a pay rise. And I'm happy for the midwives. I think they deserve better pay, and they get that in this budget, and that's a good thing. We would absolutely have put more money into health and education and infrastructure. We did that every single year we were in government, and we would have continued to do it. What we would have done, though, is been much more true to our promises. We would have been much more targeted in our spending, and we would have ensured that there was no wasteful spending. We certainly wouldn't have cut $200 million from Pharmac, as this budget's done.
Thank you very much for your time. Amy Adams, their Nationals finance spokesperson, at 18 minutes to 8.
Kai he te putia, where is the money, is a question being asked